This is the Mutual Aid Report.
Your own community.
It's all volunteers.
The love that people have for Chicago.
Led by intergenerational hosts and journalists spotlighting how Chicagoans keep each other safe.
Hello, my name is Eric.
Hi, my name is Rita.
Through food access, youth programs, immigration defense, and grassroots rapid response. Hear practical stories, tools, and invites to volunteer, donate, and show up. Thanks for tuning in. Let's listen in on today's report.
You're listening to the Mutual Aid Report on WLPN-LP Chicago, 105.5 FM Lumpen Radio. And today we're talking about deportation, not just as a policy issue, but as a lived crisis. What happens when ICE enters someone's life? What does solidarity look like when the immediate threat is detention or removal? And how does mutual aid function when the state itself is the source of danger? Today's guest is Antonio Gutierrez from OCAD, an organization that sits at the intersection of deportation defense and mutual aid. OCAD engages directly with immigration enforcement while organizing communities to protect one another. In this conversation, we'll explore how deportation reshapes families' lives, how community defense builds leverage, and what it might mean to imagine safety beyond detention and deportation. This interview was pre-recorded on the 12th of February, 2026. And now, Antonio Gutierrez. Antonio, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you being on the Mutual Aid Report. And I know that there's a lot going on, and I'm not going to keep you here forever, but there's a lot to talk about, and I'm glad that you're here with us today to hash some of this stuff out.
No, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. OCAD is the Organized Communities Against Deportations. Talk to me a little bit about what OCAD does.
Yeah, so OCAD has been doing anti-deportation public campaign work in the city of Chicago for 13 years since we started the organization in 2013. Before that, many of the co-founders of OCAD were part of the Immigrant Youth Justice League, AJO, that had stopped the deportation of young people. Back then, we were using terms like dreamers that unfortunately for a criminal arrest were put into deportation proceedings, even though some of them had been in the U.S. since they were 1 year old. And so when DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, was announced under the Obama administration as his second term was starting, we also started seeing an increase of immigration enforcement. Our parents, our neighbors, our individuals in our community were getting detained and put in deportation proceedings, while many of us were able to benefit from the DACA program. And so that's when we pivoted into doing anti-deportation work that was intergenerational and intersectional against the criminality of or criminalization of undocumented immigrants.
We know about the onslaught of ICE. People think ICE is a new organization. It's not. It's a rather old organization, all things considered. How have you been able to, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this so it doesn't sound as bad as it's going to sound, but how have you as an organization been able to combat what ICE is trying to do and keep the integrity of fighting off mass deportations and things like that? How has OCAD, you used the word pivoted, how have you pivoted since ICE has become more of a factor in what's going on in our city and around the country?
Yeah, ICE has definitely been around for about 23 years since the passing of the Patriot Act in 2012 or 22 and 23 by the U.S. Congress after the terrorist attack on 9/11. That's when ICE became a militarized agency of immigration enforcement, and is the agency that as OCAD we've been able to resist and fight back against by supporting directly impacted undocumented immigrants that want to resist or fight back against an unfair deportation and ultimately forced displacement from their communities. I think what we are seeing, though, even though the agency has been in existence for over 2 decades, is an increase of tactics and an ability to even further violate people's rights in the process of doing immigration enforcement under the second term of the Trump administration. And so the way that we've been preparing and resisting back over the last year, because now it has been a year since the inauguration of this current administration, is by informing people of their rights. We did over 250 Know Your Rights presentations from in different like spaces, from schools, libraries, theaters, private businesses, to inform and allow them to make a collective plan for how they're going to handle an encounter with an ICE agent or also Customs and Border Patrol, CBP. And so that amount of presentations is really to empower all of us in our communities to be able to know our rights and when to identify when those rights are being violated and what to do in case they are being violated so that we can hopefully still resist and fight back in court and in other ways by using advocacy and organizing. And so out of the results of those Know Your Rights presentations, and it's not just OCAD that is doing them, organizations like the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICER, has also been leading like weekly trainings around Know Your Rights and rapid response. So they also have been able to distribute that communication and that information to many other people besides the one that OCAD has directly done a presentation for. And then people are then taking our materials or after attending a Know Your Rights training that they can then implement one of their own with their neighbors in their block parties. And so that ultimately has created a long, like a very strong collective understanding of what are our rights when ICE shows up to our door or is trying to enter our business or our workplace, and what to do and how to relate that information ideally to the Family Support Network hotline, the FSN hotline, which is the other way that is OCAD were contributing to the resistance. OCAD has been answering the option for the FSN hotline to report a raid, an ICE raid happening in real time in our communities throughout the Chicagoland area, or to report when somebody has already been detained and people, family members are trying to get information resources, a legal referral so that they can support that individual now that they've been detained. And so we've been doing that, responding for about 10 years, but it definitely looks very different right now under this current unprecedented time of the resources of the attacks that ICE is perpetrating into our communities. So we went from having 5 staff members that will take on 1 day each to answer the hotline calls, because sometimes there were maybe 2 calls per day, sometimes there were 2 calls per week. But right now we're getting at the peaks of like Midway Blitz operation last year from September to November. On just 1 day, we got over 1,200 calls on the Family Support Network hotline. So the capacity looks very different by having more operators that can take on multiple calls at the same time to further train them and develop their skill sets, and to continue to update our materials of training and the resources we provide to the public based on the different attacks and different memos and policies that the Department of Homeland Security and ICE constantly are changing, either through litigation or just by internal memos, such as the memo that we saw recently in the last couple of weeks of informing their ICE agents that they can enter people's homes without having a judicial warrant, and that administrative warrant is sufficient in order to enter people's private properties, where ultimately many district courts and federal judges and even the Supreme Court might disagree with that memo. And so how do we continue to update those materials while new information is being provided to the public around how ICE is implementing or carrying out their enforcement?
ICE tends to frame its work as public safety. They've made some pretty grandiose claims about why they're doing what they're doing. here in Chicago, in Minnesota, in Los Angeles, in Memphis, everywhere they've been. Um, what gets lost in that narrative about ICE being an agency that is for public safety?
I think what is lost in there is that the majority of the people that they've been detaining over this current administration over the last year have been people that had no criminal record whatsoever and that are not a risk to public safety at all in our communities. On the contrary, they're the single mothers, they are the hardworking immigrants that came here for looking for a better life, looking for security, that are refugees, that have escaped violence and political persecution in their countries of origin, and that they're just trying to have safety in their own homes and build communities. And that unfortunately, while there are individuals that have perpetrated harm into our communities, that DHS has successfully and ICE has successfully detained, they focus on those individuals while also ignoring the fact that more than the majority of individuals currently in detention have no criminal record,
Hmm.
and that the only reason why they are detained is because of the lack of immigration status in this country, which ultimately results from an immigration broken system that has existed for decades in this country with no immigration reform or any other path to citizenship that is allowed to those individuals. And that we also know that for ICE, keeping people in detention is a profit-making business that mostly benefits private companies like GEO in Civic Corps that ultimately benefit out of having individuals in detention, even when there's no real public safety reason to keep them there instead of allowing them to go through immigration court and being with their families while they're overseeing a civil matter and civil process instead of criminal charges.
At the time that we're recording this, earlier today, on the day that we're recording this episode of the Mutual Aid Report, um, in Minnesota, ICE has made a decision to pull out again, not playing their hand as to where they may show up next. Uh, Recently, one of the alders stated a concern that they would be coming back to Chicago. There are some ICE agents here, but in mass, as they did before with Operation Blitz. Is your concern, or is there concern on your part, and OCAD's part, that ICE will be making a return visit in bigger numbers to Chicago?
I think that there's no doubt from our perspective that they will be back. It is just about when they will be back and what kind of tactics will they be implementing this time. I think that we've been preparing and we continue to prepare to not let our guard down. The amount of operators at the hotline has only increased since last November. We have trained more people to do that work and that role. We continue to strengthen the rapid response teams network that we have here in the Chicagoland area that we've been able to build over the last 12 months. More people are engaged and aware of what's happening and know that they have the right to document any ICE activity or CBP activity in their communities, in public space, or with the permission of a private, from the owner or manager, if it's a private company or private space. So as long as people are aware of those rights and kind of what to do in those instances, we'll continue to resist and document the atrocities that ICE and CBP will continue to do in our communities and how it impacts overall families in our communities and impacts our social fabric. And I think that that's ultimately what we can all do and contribute to, especially when the perpetrator of the harm is the government and agencies that so claim to be the protectors of public safety, when, as we all have seen those videos from Minneapolis, all the ways to the ones that we saw here in Chicago, uh, they don't promote public safety for what the majority of the public's perspective is. On the contrary, they're the perpetrators of the harm instability that our communities are feeling right now.
I don't want to get too deep into the minutia of ICE and what they've done, but it would be I would not be doing my job if I did not mention prior to the two folks in Minnesota who were murdered, 7 other people were murdered by ICE. Hundreds of people have been harmed physically by them. We know about the atrocities in the holding centers or concentration camps, if you will, that they have going. At this time, what does solidarity look like when we're talking about, in practice, what does solidarity look like when we're talking about how to respond to what ICE is doing?
Mhm. I think solidarity right now looks like for all of us to know that there's a role for all of us to play at what is happening currently under immigration enforcement, whether that is donating funds that you might have available to you and pass them on to like a mutual aid at your neighborhood level or to organizations like OCAD that are providing cash assistance support, grocery support, to undocumented immigrants that unfortunately been impacted by ICE raids, meaning that a family member has been in fact already been detained and is currently in detention, currently going through the deportation removal process, and that there's uncertainty as to whether that family member will come back to their home. There are other ways that people are plugging in, like joining the rapid response team and being one of those individuals that are willing to take the risk. Because at this time, as we have seen, and you just mentioned right now, right, doing rapid response is a risky role. People are accepting and consenting to the understanding that you responding to a tip might mean that you might get murdered, that you might not come back to your own house and to your own family. And I think as long as individuals are consenting and aware of those risks, people can go from that extreme of just donating from the comfort of your home, donating any funds that you might have available, all the way to actually putting your body and your safety and your life even and the unfortunate circumstances that we're living through at this time, and putting yourself on the line in that way. And that is a spectrum of many other possibilities that people can stand in solidarity. People can reshare posts of information or maybe set up a know your rights presentation at your church or your school, or your place of worship, just so that we can continue to increase the amount of awareness and collective knowledge in order to resist. And I think that solidarity looks like people creating relationships with their neighbors where those relationships have never existed, because now people are aware of who lives in their block, they're talking to each other, they're building those relationships, so that in case ICE does show up to their block, that they're better prepared and knowing who got detained, and to also lean in on the fact that the arrest is not the end. Somebody getting arrested by ICE is not the end, and on the contrary, from OCA's perspective, that is just the beginning of our fights that even when people have been physically removed or deported to their countries of origin, we've been able to bring them back. And so solidarity to me also is an aspect of hope in a sense, right, that we will ultimately win as long as people continue to advocate and fight back. Because at least what we're not doing is that we're not giving up. And as long as we don't give up, there's still a sense that like hope exists and that overall, uh, as we've been seeing in many posts online and kind of the sentiment, right? Like that the only thing that is stronger than hate, because I do think that ICE is carrying out their enforcement with very hateful and racist rhetorics and tactics. That the only stronger than hate is love, and people are showing how much love they have for one another, especially in this like horrible circumstances that we're living through.
I'm also like I'm one of those people who sees this from a really I would like to say a unique perspective. Though I am not at the risk of deportation, they are challenging American citizens who are not even close to being deported for any reason at all, and making you used the word fear. It's an unsettling feeling knowing that at any time, any place, someone could approach you illegally, for the most part, lay hands on you, put you in a truck, drive you off somewhere, and leave you there. We're noticing that a lot of the legal challenges are now falling back into the people's favor. Do you think that that will have an effect on how much ICE, if they come back, well, when they come back to Chicago, how much they will actually be able to do? And I have to imagine that the stench of these murders has affected how they're able to police, or has it?
I think the overall objective of ICE wanting to create a sense of collective fear in our communities is clear from our perspective as OCAD. That has always been the intent with any type of operation that they carry on or any workplace raid, right? Is that ultimately for people to feel like that there is no safety and that they can get away or normalize that this behavior should be accepted by all of us that live in the United States, whether we are undocumented or not. And I think that they are trying to understand how much is the public going to allow them to get away with? How much are we willing to normalize so that they can continue to violate our rights? Because right now they might be focusing on the status of the immigration status of individuals. What is there to say that tomorrow they won't just start disappearing or arresting individuals that are against this administration's ideologies or approaches, and ultimately creating that police state and sense of collective fear. I fear that is the ultimate like goal and objective. That it really isn't to create public safety, but to create a sense of fear that we all share in order to not resist or to even dare to come out of our homes when they are present in our blocks and to get our phones out and document them out of fear of whether we are going to get shot, just like Alex Pretty and Rene Good did in Minneapolis. And as you put it, right, even before those, there were many other individuals that already got murdered by ICE just last year alone, that unfortunately the media didn't pick them up as much as Alex and Renee's like murder made in Minneapolis, out of first lack of documentation. That is one factor. So we need to continue to document because those videos is what keeps us aware of the truth, because we know that ICE and DHS is lying to the public at this time. And that ultimately it also brings this aspect of how do we how certain lives are much more important than others. And I don't think that having a legal status or being a US citizen should be discarding people's humanities, right? The reasons why we didn't care about all these other murders that happened under ISIS watch and under ISIS hands is because people were undocumented or were claimed to have probable cause that they were here illegally. And that shouldn't be a reason why somebody should be more receptive to being murdered by an agency that, again, is part of the government that we ourselves feed and that are part of it and should be able to have a saying in how it carries out their work of public safety. And unfortunately, that's not the reality. But even then, we are creating those systems of caring for one another through mutual aid, through rapid response, to know your rights, to getting out and joining marches and rallies to show our discontent. Um, and whether it feels like it moves us to the right direction or not, it is at least resulting in some people uh, feeling like there is solidarity and that they're not fully alone. Uh, and it allows all of us to be part of a solution that, yeah, that unfortunately is needed at this time when the government is the one targeting us, targeting undocumented people, but eventually targeting anybody that disagrees with this administration.
We're going to take a break soon, but before we do, I want to ask, you mentioned mutual aid. This is the Mutual Aid Report on Lumpen Radio. I wanted to ask where OCAD sits within that broader ecosystem of mutual aid and community care.
So right now we currently have a mutual aid fund that is open to the rapid response networks and the individual families that they are working with. In many instances, they are meeting these families when they are doing ICE or CBP documentation. So they're meeting individuals as the family member has been detained, or maybe ICE attempted to enter their home without a judicial warrant. And so we've been able to distribute over $262,000 over the last 3 months alone. That this fund started in November. All of those funds are either coming from individual donors that are donating to our donor box page, a fundraiser page, right, where people can donate to that. And also foundations that are giving private funds in order for us to give this cash assistance support around groceries need, around rental assistance payments, because when somebody gets detained in a household, that is traumatic in itself, but there's also other impacts, and one of those impacts is the economic safety of that household. All of a sudden, you might lose a full income that was supporting the family, and so we're trying to meet those needs and gaps. While people also need to continue to navigate the removal process themselves, and hopefully getting them attorneys or legal representation for those procedures. And so those systems of care is really something that is just, as OCAD, we consider ourselves the vessel for people to come together and, yes, in this instance for mutual aid, provide cash assistance or funding to a fund that then is going directly to the hands of those directly impacted by raids and deportation, and allowing them to know that there is a community that doesn't think that they are disposable, that cares for them, and that this is a way that they want to show up for them. But there's many other ways that community is showing up for them under this time that they're being unprecedentedly targeted. Um, and at the same time, it allows us to feel empowered, right? That we are what we need, that we do keep each other safe, and that we don't need agencies like ICE or CBP or even our local or federal governments to create those systems of care, of cash assistance, of financial support, that we, the people, can create them ourselves.
We're with Antonio Gutierrez from OCAD, the Organized Communities Against Deportations organization, and we will be taking a small break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Antonio, and we will be back in just a moment. This is the Mutual Aid Report. Welcome back to the Mutual Aid Report. My name is Mario Smith. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're with Antonio Gutierrez from OCAD, Organized Communities Against Deportations. I have, since this is all the rejoin of ICE into these communities has put a bigger focus on immigration and immigration reform. I think we can agree that the tactics being used are heavy-handed, to say the least. But it's coming from a need to identify what America's immigration policy is, deportation being part of that policy. What is it that, and this is really more about just a general feeling, I guess, and I'm not asking you to make policy, but what do you think, or how do you think we can address the issue of immigration and deportations as a country better to make ICE a thing of the past?
Yeah. I think for us at OCAD, since we started the organization, it's undocumented people that created this organization to support other undocumented people. It has always been clear to us that ICE cannot be reformed, that ICE needs to be abolished as the agency that we have known over the last 13 years that have only violated, attacked, target, terrorized, and criminalized our undocumented and just in general immigrant communities throughout the nation. We must abolish ICE in order to really start the dialogue and conversation around how we want to collectively approach the broken immigration system that has unfortunately existed in this country for centuries. That this deportation machine is not a creation of the Trump administration or Republicans, but that both Republicans and Democrats have benefited and continue to develop the deportation machine that currently the Trump administration is using, and that is so connected to private profit-making companies that are benefiting from people being in cages and being detained. That all needs to crumble to the floor in order for us to actually have a civic engaged conversation that involves all stakeholders, and that should include undocumented immigrants that have been promoting and participating in their communities, whether Republicans and Democrats and US citizens like it or not. We've been providing so much money in tax revenue by filling up income taxes, regardless of what the rhetoric of Republicans are. There's been facts about that support that we've been providing. We are consumers. We provide back to this very oppressive capitalist like system that we live through, but that people want to benefit out of it, and that they just want a better life for them and their families. And so it's going to require for us to really abolish that private like sector that benefits from detention and for the deportation and removal of individuals, and the abolishment of ICE as an agency, in order for us to have that dialogue. What that will look like, I think that there's always been contemplation of immigration reform, but as OCAD, we understand that whenever there is a program that benefits some individuals, that there's ultimately an increasement of enforcement, or that there's targeting of everybody that does not qualify, or that does not meet the requirements for that program, or for that legal status to happen. And that unfortunately, whether people like it or not, we are here already, and we deserve like dignity, not just based on the fact that we are contributing members of our communities, but just based on the fact that we are human. And that should be part of the dialogue. So I do not have the answer to the policy that will make it all, but in order for us to continue that collective dialogue and to find that answer, we must first make sure that people feel safe, and to feel like that they can voice their needs. And unfortunately, right now, the existence of ICE only prevents and keeps people in the shadows and in fear of coming out, and to exercise their rights and their dignity. And so we definitely see that as the first step in order for us to continue that conversation collectively.
This is undoubtedly heavy work, right? And I'm asking you just person to person, what sustains you and the community in the face of all this harm that has been taking place? What is it that the end goal being the abolishment of ICE, no doubt. But what is it that sustains you and the community in the midst of all of this that's happening?
Mm-hmm. I've been and I will continue to be very public about my own status as an undocumented immigrant that's been here for 25 years, in this country, that has found a home in Chicago, ever since I came from Mexico at a young age, um, and that it is important for us to create, to be visible in order to uh, engage and empower other people to do the same. Um, I think that this is not just a job, even though, yes, my financial needs that I have in order to survive capitalism are met by having a job or a work, or working at OCAD. But that ultimately this is a life commitment and a life purpose that not only allows me to feel safe because I know that I have community around me that will keep me and like others like safe. But that ultimately, when I see neighbors, even strangers that don't know each other and that want to donate or want to lend a hand to a neighbor in need, that those moments like really like um yeah, they simplify like what love really is and how we can resist this hate with love, and to ultimately to not believe in that, it will be a disservice to who I want to be and what values are aligned in my life. Um, and that ultimately, I also get the satisfaction to know that what we're doing is caring for one another, uh, and that ultimately that feels like we are on the right side of history and of the fight than those that lead their decisions with hate and racism, and with wanting others to be in a lower position that they themselves have the privilege of enjoying. And that in itself makes me feel, um, yeah, that just like there have been many others that fought for social justice before I came, even before I came to this country or before I was even born, um, that I myself doing what I can to leave this world in a better place that I have encountered, and that my bravery and the bravery of anybody that resists to fight back by becoming a rapid responder, by saying a no to a deportation, uh, that ultimately we are all making the strive to get other people involved and to believe that a much more fair, dignified like world and life is possible. And I think that is priceless. That is a commitment of life that gives me much more um, empowerment and fulfillment that any fulfillment that I could have, even with them actually being able, which it would not be possible, to deport all 13 million undocumented immigrants.
Mm.
They would never feel that fulfilled, even if they were able to complete that task.
For listeners who are involved in mutual aid, because we do have folks who listen to the show who are philanthropists, et cetera, um, and being involved where they live, how can they meaningfully support deportation defense efforts like what OCAD does?
Mhm. Petition defense can mean many different things. It could mean supporting a family or individual that doesn't know how they can allocate their family member that was detained days ago. So knowing resources like the ICE locator, knowing that there are organizations like OCAD, not just here in Chicago, but throughout the nation that have learned, that have been inspired by us, that we have been inspired by them about the work that we've been able to lead over the last many like decades around immigration and deportation defense, and that ultimately to believe that you you and the general you as a collective you, we have the power to make this change, right? To believe that it is possible because OCAD was created by undocumented youth and undocumented people that had enough and that wanted to create a safe space for undocumented people to thrive, and that we've been able to continue to sustain that movement because ultimately the objective was not to create a nonprofit and to have staff members doing the work. It has always been to empower undocumented people to lead their own resistance fights against the unfair treatment that we have identified at ICE, and that it has only been increased during this current administration. So don't be afraid to be that bold to create something new and to create systems of care. Um, yeah, and that ultimately deportation defense also is helping individuals meet their financial needs while they navigate an unfair and undignified and many times dehumanizing immigration court system, um, that ultimately while people are in detention, they're not able to be with their families and make sure that they are also meeting those needs. And in the example, right, of our mutual aid, while we've been able to distribute over $262,000 in just 3 months, right? There is the reality that there are individuals in our wait list right now that are waiting for that support, that those funds only been able to provide cash assistance to 171 households, right? That's not nearly enough to the need that we are encountering and that we're going to continue to encounter is ICE will continue and is continuing their enforcement in Minneapolis or eventually in our been in Chicago this whole time, right? Uh, ICE has never left. They have continued to detain individuals in Chicago, while the existence of whether CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, will come back in the near future to Chicago. That's something, again, that we'll continue to prepare as best as we can to that. For people to not give up, because it will be very easy for all of us to fall into despair, knowing how many resources and who the enemy, in this case, ICE, is, and how it is supported by the US government. Um, but that ultimately, yeah, having that, it is not an option to give up or to give up on the belief that we could create the change that we need, because otherwise we 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 lost. And I don't think we are losing. On the contrary, we are winning in many different ways. We are getting people released. We are getting people under bond. We continue to fight in core. And that ultimately is giving a sense of hope. These 171 families that got supported through the Mutual Aid Fund like truly believe that they are individuals and systems of care that are there for them. And we want to provide that same opportunity or that same support to many other families. And we cannot do that without the support of everybody that has donated to our fund or that has continued to donate to other funds that have popped out or that are being created today by neighbors just wanting um, to provide support to their neighbors being impacted by ICE raids and deportations.
When it comes to people donating to OCAD for the mutual aid piece, what should people prioritize? What is the need for OCAD right now from folks who are giving donations?
Yes. By now, we definitely want people to donate directly to our fund. You can find the link to on our website, organizedcommunities.org. On the donate button, there is an option to donate to OCAD. Right now, that is not the priority. We have what we need in regards to our operations and our build and foundations are supporting our work. Right now, if you have $20, $100 to give to your neighbors and to provide support to those directly impacted by race and deportation. There is the donor box like page in that donate tab that you can directly donate to the fund. Those funds never are used for operations of OCAD. 100% of those funds what we're using for the cash assistance support that these families are receiving. And on average, just to give you all an idea, right, there's been 636 donations on the donor box page. On average, the average donation amount is $92, right? So anything helps. And that if you can just support with one donation or making a recurring donation so that we can continue to meet our goal and get back to these families that are in our wait list, that are working with rapid responders, that are trying to get an attorney through the Family Support Network hotline, that OCAD is directly working on individuals' releases in coordination after people get released. Because a lot of things that people are not talking about is how we are getting releases and that ICE is literally taking people away from Chicago as far away as Texas and Louisiana and will just literally kick that person out of the detention with no money, with sometimes no working phones or no resources, or even a phone call to their family member to let them know that they're being released, and just leaving them out in the street. And OCAD is also supporting those efforts around bringing actually people back to Chicago, right? And ultimately, that there's many different ways that people can provide. And if you cannot donate, donate your time. Volunteer with OCAD, volunteer with your local rapid response, become trained on how to do ICE documentation, because we are completely aware that it is not a question about whether they will be back, but when they will be back. And when they will be increasing their enforcement again in Chicago, while we continue to work with the mayor and elected officials, right, to continue to advocate for better protections of public safety, and the executive order that the mayor in Chicago just did around requesting CPD, Chicago Police Department, which in a general sense, whether we agreed or not, right, should be protecting our public safety as Chicago residents, should now be documenting and documenting ICE activity and not leaving that just to the civic engagement of community members that are plugging into the rapid response teams, but to actually put some responsibility on CPD to actually enforce what public safety looks like when ICE is present into our communities. And I think that those efforts are all contributing, right, to the overall collective efforts that we are leading, and that should be led by directly impacted individuals, and not by individuals that might not understand what those impacts look like. And that we discuss many of those impacts today during this conversation.
I have a couple of minutes left. First of all, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it. This was so informative. I learned a lot that I didn't know, particularly about them releasing people and just leaving them wherever they sent them. That's crazy. I did not know that at all.
Right.
In the couple of minutes we have left, if I say to you, what does a future without deportation look like to you?
I think it'll be a future where people will find ways to continue to build on the systems of care that we're currently building out of, yes, a reaction to the attacks that we're experiencing, but that it allows us to build this sense that this transformation, that something bigger is possible, and that we ourselves can create it, that we don't need saviors or the government to create them for us. Um, and I think that that is a world that I want to live in, a world where people are not afraid to um, to come out as undocumented, or they're not afraid about sharing parts of their identities with others. Um, and I think that that is a future of like liberation. So a future without deportations allows us to have the first step to what what our communities can then continue to advocate and to resist back, right? Because abolishing ICE is just one step. We need to have further conversations around the exploitation of our labor, of how we're not properly paid, of how our schools, our public school systems continue to decrease in funding or receive decrease in funding, of how we need more green spaces and more accessibility, and accessibility for those that are not able or that don't have able bodies, right? There's so many more isms and oppressions that our communities are living, the increase of housing costs, that we still need to discuss, but that at least abolishing ICE will allow over 13 million undocumented immigrants that are in our communities living in them right now to also be part of those civic conversations, because we are part of those communities and we also are feeling the impact of many of these other oppressions, besides the fact that ICE might be targeting us at this time.
Antonio, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really, really appreciate it and hope to talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
We've been speaking with Antonio Gutierrez from OCAD about deportation defense, mutual aid, and what it means to build solidarity when the threat is immediate and deeply personal. If today's conversation makes anything clear, it's that deportation isn't just a legal mechanism. It's a system that isolates people, destabilizes families, and relies on fear. Mutual aid interrupts that isolation. It builds trust, material support, and sometimes enough collective power to change an outcome. For those involved in mutual aid where you live, consider how deportation shows up in your own community. Who is most vulnerable? What relationships already exist? And what would it mean to move from charity to collective defense? If you want more information about OCAD, go to organizedcommunities.org. Thanks so much for listening to the Mutual Aid Report. My name is Mario Smith. We hope to talk to you soon. This has been the Mutual Aid Report.
Thank you for listening to the Mutual Aid Report. If you learned anything from this episode today, we hope you learned that collective care, shared resources, and community action are powerful tools, that when we show up for one another, we create the conditions for everyone to thrive. We'll be back with more stories, insights, and conversations that highlight the power of community. Until next time, take care of yourself so we can take care of each other.